So I've worked with a lot of coaches over the years, and many of them describe themselves as win-aholics. They feel once the games get going, all they can focus on is winning the next game. And maybe like an alcoholic or a drug addict, getting that win is only just a quick fix because they move right on to the next game and all they can focus on about is winning that one. Now, winning absolutely matters in sports. It's what makes sports a sport, right? And not just physical activity like going for a bike ride or walking or kicking the ball around in the backyard. In sport, there are winners and there are losers. And at the same time, when we over-focus on winning, when it's all we can think about, well, it costs us. It costs us, at a minimum, sleep. It costs us our health. It costs us joy in coaching. And it even can cost us relationships. I haven't met a lot of coaches. I don't know if I've met any coach ever who got to the end of their coaching journey and said, gosh, I didn't care enough about winning. I wish I had wanted to win more. But I have met quite a few coaches who have said, I focused too much on winning. I wish I hadn't been all consumed by it. These coaches that say that, they're oftentimes the most winningest coaches, right? Like the most successful one being probably like 49ers football coach Bill Walsh with his 3 Super Bowls. In today's episode, Nate, Betsy, and I, we're going to unpack how to win with purpose and avoid that trap of being a win-aholic. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nerbun, and I'm joined by Nate, Sanderson, and Betsy Butterick. The mission of this podcast is to help you become a better leader and build a better team culture. To get the notes to this in every episode of the podcast, all you need to do is subscribe to the Team Culture Toolbox. It's the TOC Weekly Newsletter. There's a link in the details of this episode, or you can do so at tocculture.com. Also, check out Betsy's blog on Substack at Betsy Butterick. So today we are going to tackle a very important topic, I think, in leadership and coaching, one that I think sometimes people are very quick to either want to feel like they have to choose one or the other. And that is, do we want to win as a coach, or am I about purpose and mission, making a difference in the lives of athletes, creating a positive experience? And obviously we talk about this word polarities on the podcast often, which is feeling like we have to choose one or the other. And today we're going to talk about really what makes this challenging to navigate, both what inside of us, what probably is this desire to win the championship, to win the big games. And at the same time, like something purposeful in our coaching and our leadership to make a difference in the lives of our athletes, to create positive experiences and memories, right? So we often might feel like we have to choose one or the other. We're going to talk a little bit about what makes this difficult to navigate these two things. And then we're going to start to talk about, well, what does it look like to actually integrate those? Because in my experience, like some of the best leaders that we've even had on this podcast, like the Dave Brandts, right? Like, and even just recently with Rob Dow from Vermont Soccer, like these are people that really want to win. It's very, very important to them, but they're also very purposeful in their leadership, very mission driven. So I'll throw it over to you, Betsy, to get this off this conversation going. When you look at the leaders that you work with, the coaches you work with, what makes this really hard to navigate for these coaches?
Yeah, this comes up often. And the context in which it often arises is the joke in coaching that you get hired for process and fired for outcome, right? So I got into the coaching profession because all the things you just said, JP, I want to make a positive difference in the lives of others. I'm committed to growth and development of the individual, not just in their sport, but in life in general. And especially in the current context of the way club sports at the youth level and then college sports are becoming more transactional and more business oriented, coaches are often seeing themselves continue or end their careers based off of how frequently or infrequently they win. And if you look at this over the spectrum of, let's say, an athlete and their development in their sport, and I was thinking about this past weekend was my nephew's first travel baseball tournament. So he is 8, he looks like he's 12, and he's playing up, and they go to this away game. And the first day they played 2 different games to determine seeding, and then the next day it was single elimination. And so the family thread is going about how Henry's doing. And my mother-in-law is like, how did Henry do in the game? Great question, right? And then I threw in there like, and is he having fun? Because when you've got kids starting out in sport, the purpose isn't to win. The purpose is exposure. The purpose is Socialization, the purpose is fun, like just getting them out there, getting them active. But then you go to the other end of the spectrum and we've got adults who are professionals and the purpose is to win. That is why you're part of this roster. You are being paid specifically to generate a certain outcome. So I think part of the challenge is many coaches feel like I got into the profession for this reason, and yet the expectations feel like they need to be different in order to achieve that winning outcome. So the big challenge that I hear from many coaches is, how, to your point, JP, how do I integrate? Like, how do I stay true to my purpose while also making us successful?
Yeah, JP, when I think about this, I think often, as you mentioned, we perceive it as a dichotomy, that it's one or the other. And quite frankly, I probably have thought that way on both ends of the spectrum in my career. 5 years ago, I would have said that I don't care about winning, and I remember going through job interviews and, at the end, they're like, do you have any questions for us? And, I would say, well, what do you think about this? I don't really care about winning at all. Like I want to create a great experience. I want to have this impact on kids. We're going to try to win, but it's not important to me, and as I reflected on that a little bit, like part of the reason I was in that place, I think, is because to what Betsy said, like, should winning and losing be the determining factor for whether or not a coach is able to keep their job? That seems silly to me, to a certain point where we might do all these other things that have value, but if you don't win enough, it doesn't matter. And I think that is dripping down in the sports world. Certainly, it's obviously that's the purpose at the professional level, but that's becoming more and more true at the collegiate level, and at the high school level, right? And so, coming away from that and saying, well, you didn't win enough, so you can't keep your job is probably one of the reasons why, I was in that place. But now, fast forward 5 years later, and I think that after being at a school that really values, excellence and trying to strive for your best and wanting to be competitive in everything, at first I was a little put off by that. And I think now I'm looking back that I think there's a value in not being ashamed of setting big, audacious goals. So I think what we discovered by kind of setting a big goal is that it really creates more of a need to develop resiliency, um, or it creates a standard, for performance that is challenging and beneficial to us. There's a striving that has to happen in order to accomplish that thing. And not only that, but especially in a team context, that means that there's sacrifices that are going to have to be made, that people are going to have to accept their roles, and everybody's going to have to perform at their best to contribute to trying to do this thing, right? And if we don't say winning matters, if we don't say trying to make it to state matters, there's less urgency there. And I think in some ways you miss some of the challenges that can present themselves and the lessons for life when you really are going after something that, collectively say, no, this really matters to try to accomplish. Doesn't define us. It doesn't necessarily, that's not who we are or who we aren't, but I do think there is value in that, in not being afraid to set these big goals and chase after them.
Yeah, and I think what you both have touched on there is there's a different types of wanting to win, right? And I think we really drill down to it is where I see it's hard to navigate this purpose and winning is that people really simplify, well, that coach wants to win, that coach doesn't, or like, well, there's the people that want to win and there's the people that don't really care about winning. And I would say that it's actually what's really important to you about winning. And if you're at the place where Betsy kind of brought in, which is like, I want to keep my job. Okay, now you're operating from a place of fear, right? And we know how that goes in life, right? To operate from a place of fear, right? I also, there's a lot of people get fired and they really wanted to win really bad, right? I don't find the people getting fired are the ones that didn't want to win that often, right? It's just the people that just haven't won, right? A lot in those cases. So just wanting to win to keep our job, I don't think it actually helps us keep our job that much. It just probably creates more pressure, stress, and actually takes us away from that. I think there's other people that say, I want to win because I'm about to prove something. And like, that's really deep. We don't need to go into all the psychology of it all, but like the Bill Walsh 0 points for winning, I talk about the culture system with this whole idea of like At a point, you're trying like to prove yourself. It comes back to winning and identity. And we've got enough stories in life around, not even just in sports, but in business, around how it leads to people making unethical decisions, or not even necessarily unethical decisions that get them fired or thrown in jail, but, decisions that just operate against our values, right? We don't spend the time we want with our family. We're not showing up as the person we want to at work. We're not treating people with respect, right? So that whole thing can really turn badly for us. But I think what you're talking about there, Nate, is this whole idea of like, hey, do I want to win because I believe that winning is us living up to our potential, right? And if an athletic department's like, hey, we value excellence, we want coaches that help people to fulfill their athletic potential, and this guy over here, this woman over here, they're really nice people and they care about the kids, but not really helping them grow, like reach their athletic potential. Well, maybe there is an argument that they should be fired at more competitive levels, right? Like when we because we can do both. We can do both, right? We can be competitive. We can stretch athletes, to your point, Nate, at the same time, care about them as people. And so I think what makes this hard is our own mindset upon how we view the thing. We just go back to this is, well, I'm either a winner or I'm not, right? And it's like, no, it's a lot more complex than what we might think.
Well, and if I could just build on that too, JP, I think part of the complexity is every stakeholder in your program thinks about that differently, right? So you might have on your team 12 players, on your varsity team, and 6 of them really want to win at a high level, and 4 of them really want to play, and 2 of them are really glad to be there. And, maybe winning's not that important, or they haven't thought about it that much, or they weren't part of the team that's trying to come back and do a thing, right? From the year before. And so, even having an understanding of that at the individual level of what are the motivators and how are the individuals perceiving this thing, because if the coach comes in and says, look, the most important thing for us is to win a state title, or to win this many games or whatever, and the players aren't interested in that or as interested in that, that's going to create some conflict as well if those conversations aren't happening at some point where everybody is congealing around, yes, this is the thing that we want to create, both in terms of maybe an outcome based direction and the experience that we're trying to have along the way.
Yeah, Nate, I think you're spot on with the challenge can be, okay, I have different purpose than my teammate, or I as a coach have a different purpose than some of the athletes on my team. So how do we create shared purpose? Like, even if we're starting from different places with our purpose for being a part of this program, can we come to an understanding and alignment about a shared purpose? And from that place, operate in an intentional way that allows us to pursue that purpose with the same type of effort or investment or engagement. What comes up for me in listening to both of you is, okay, if we say the goal is to win, or if the expectation is to win, or if we talk about winning as a coach in any way, challenge I hear from coaches is, well, as soon as I talk about winning or expectations for any kind of championship or level of success, there's automatically pressure. Now I'm creating pressure. I'm putting pressure on the athletes to perform. And then what follows are often complaints about, the environment's detrimental to my mental health and well-being, or, coaches putting too much pressure on me. So talk a little bit, both of you, if you would, about how do you emphasize success and winning while navigating that felt, oh, I'm putting pressure on the athletes?
This is a great question. And I think one of the hardest things about that, helping athletes to navigate the pressures of winning, like that's the question in that, right? Is how do we help them in that? And I think one of the hardest things is we have to understand where they are at in many ways. First off, one is, back to Nate's point, how important is it for them to win a championship, let's just say. Now, if you asked your team and on a scale of 1 to 10, they'd probably all have different rankings on that. And that's actually something I often ask coaches to do. Have their players rank on a scale of 1 to 10. Okay, we say we want to win a championship. How important is that? Because the reality is it's different. And then what's most important about winning that state championship for you? Like, what would it mean to you? What would be so significant about that? Okay. So one thing is understanding how that goal of winning a championship, where does that come from? What's driving? How much are they tied to that? And then you actually have to go look at the psychological skills that they have. So I'm just going to take it in, where I'm living in Ireland. My kids grew up in the GA, right? And they play Gaelic football and hurling. And up until under 12s, there's no score kept. In pretty much every competition in the country, they don't keep score. Now, people kind of know score and stuff like that. And it is about inclusion and it's about participation. And I think it's great. The problem is, I think they just go all of a sudden now it's like under 13s. Okay, now we're keeping score, folks. And it's like, whoa. And now there's A's and B's and C teams. It's not equal playing time. It's not everybody's playing, right? It's like, we have not built the psychological skills for them to now be in a highly competitive environment where you lose this when you get relegated the next year, and the pressures of that and the pressures of playing time. It's like, whoa, I love this inclusion and, not getting ranking under sevens and, parents going crazy about who's winning or not. Like, but there has to be a bit of a progression to build up those psychological skills. So can they handle the pressure? I don't think they have the skills. So whatever environment we are in, what has been their experience? What has been their upbringing? And what I see a lot of is there isn't that psychological skill building. Oftentimes they're thrown in the deep end and then they don't know how to navigate that. Or that people are told to lose, the correct emotional response is anger, frustration, and like it is at 0 points for winning. That when they look at adults and how they handle losing, they go, okay, that's how you're supposed to behave. And it's not about how to handle losing with grace and learning and processing, right? We don't demonstrate that. So I think a lot of times, if you get to the collegiate level, a lot of coaches are screwed. They might have recruited a player that just has very low tolerance to lose or handle that pressure. And you got a lot of work to do. You got a lot of work to do in those situations.
Betsy, it's interesting that question about, introducing pressures that come with these big goals, right? And I think back to, the first state championship that we won, we really tried to diffuse pressure. I remember that, that postseason and getting to the state tournament and just saying like, winning and losing doesn't matter. Like the outcome of this game doesn't matter. The fact that we get to play together and we get to experience, our, what it's like to be us one more time. And, like we were really trying to anchor in the present and in the process and in the journey and the experience. And if we're good enough, we'll win, and we'll get to play again. Like the game is going to be fair. Right. And I think that for that team, because we were really young and it was like first time we were there, like that was a really powerful approach for us because it did sort of diffuse all of that, some of that expectation and really helped us to drill into where we were at. But looking back at our approach last year, because we were more explicit about like, yeah, we're trying to get back and we're trying to win the whole thing. And it wasn't something that we talked about all the time, but it was like, it's obvious that's what we're trying to do. We really talked about it as part of the landscape. If this is what we want and we end up being ranked number one, or we be the favorite, or, you get into the postseason and yeah, there is expectation there. That's part of what we asked for. That's evidence that we are where we want to be. And so what do we do now that we're there? And I know it's a cliche to say that, pressure is a privilege, but really it is. We talked about how we've earned the right to have that pressure. And so now what do we want to do with it? And when I think about, kind of what JP was talking about there, the mental skills, the psychological skills to be able to navigate a pressure packed environment where performance matters, I think that's the value. Like there's value in that, right? Because there are moments in life where players or people are going to be under pressure. There's going to be pressure to perform at work or in marriage, to show up, whatever. And, we have to be able to navigate that. And I think, again, this is where sport creates an opportunity to do that, where the stakes are still relatively low. Are we able then to teach the skills and to model the skills that JP is talking about there? Because that's one of the things that looking back, I think we missed, in our first trip, was because we really refused to engage with the pressure and we just dodged it completely. I'm not saying those kids didn't learn anything, as a part of that, but I think there maybe was opportunity that was missed there to just, let's be real about the landscape of being in a high pressure moment, and how do we want to show up, and anticipating those challenges and that sort of thing, where real growth can happen as a result of pressure, that it's just a natural part of being in that place.
And I just tell a quick story real quick. So back to what I was sharing there with my children's teams, they actually had this unique experience where they're playing this under 10s team. That's kind of they call it the community games here. And it's all local communities playing against each other. And here they're thrown, these 9 and 8-year-olds are thrown into a competitive football environment. And it is you're losing, you're done. Now you could be playing for months if you keep winning, but they're thrown in a competitive environment. They got a proper referee, and the parents seem to really show up on this day, and everything's just like the whole moment seems bigger, right? Like we had to select a roster of 16, right? Like you couldn't select more than that. So everything starts to, like, the pressure builds. By halftime, we're down by like 7 points. It's like, or at least, and we're clearly not going to win this game. And the emotions, like I've never seen out of these kids, just start come pouring out. Like one kid's like on the field crying at halftime, right? And I'm like, okay, and this is an opportunity. I probably wanted to do what maybe some other parents were about to start doing or were doing, which was like, it's okay, it's gonna be okay. And I wasn't like saying, like suck it up. I was just like letting them feel that feelings though. I was just going, this sucks, doesn't it? Right? We're probably gonna really have a hard time winning this game, right? I get that, but how do we want to play now? And then at the end of the game when we lose, it's like everyone's crying, there's tears. It's just like, wow, this is different for us, isn't it? Right? What made this feel different? I didn't know what the lesson really was in that. Maybe it was about resilience. Maybe it was that we actually really care and I want to go work harder and get better at this. But I wanted them to figure out what the lesson was from the experience. And so I just came and asked questions because I was like, this kid actually may have a different lesson about this, which is, I don't actually want to be in competitive sports. This sucks too much, And that's totally fine. I wasn't going to give them the lesson. I was just going to ask them and walk them through what they were feeling and what they wanted to take from that experience. And what you had was some players were like, I want to be better next year. I can't wait till next year. We're going to be better the next time around. And the other ones was just more like, oh boy, I don't know. Like it was just kind of still shell shocked. There wasn't probably too many profound insights there. And then, others was just like, actually it was a lot of fun. Like it stinks losing, but this was a lot of fun to play with other kids and in a competitive environment, and they have something to look forward to in a few years' time. So that was just one kind of example, I think. And I know it's under 10s football, right? But I think it comes back to how we walk through pressure and losing with our team.
Yeah, as both of you are talking, it's like so many coaches don't want to put pressure on their athletes. They don't want them to feel extra pressure or unnecessary pressure. And to your point, Nate, like pressure is a part of life. There will be times where you are feeling under pressure or feeling immense pressure to do something. The benefit of sport, opportunities to practice skills needed for life. So instead of fearing putting pressure on athletes, can we recognize the pressure will come, whether we put it there or life puts it there? And how can we be intentional about opportunities to teach the mental skills, to teach the psychological skills, to allow them to be intentional about how they are, their way of being during moments of pressure, how they can navigate that space in a way that allows them to show up as they want to. And something you said early on, Nate, that I've been meaning to circle back to, when you were talking about naming that big, audacious, hairy goal, you were really clear in saying, it's not who we are. This is our goal. That's not who we are. It gives us process. It gives us purpose. It gives us direction. We can be more intentional. It's not who we are. And I think that's such an important clarification, especially for coaching kids of all ages today, knowing from our conversations about, anti-fragility. I think about the David Durant conversation, like the way that so many of today's young people are outcome focused, to be very specific about this is our goal, and whether we make or miss that goal does not define who we are. I think there's also an opportunity for coaches to do work there, because it's one thing to say it and you get the head nods of like, yeah, that's not who I am. But then social media tells a different story. It's like, you're a winner or you're a loser, or you're this or you're that. So there's so much to unpack in this topic that I think that is part of the innate challenge. Purpose, winning, where do they intersect? Where do they overlap? Where do they differ? How do we define it? And then separate from how do we define it, like how do we navigate the differences or variables in each athlete that's a part of our sport, separate from who we take ourselves to be as a coach?
And I think there's a way that I've seen some coaches do a really good job of this identity piece too, which you're talking about there, Betsy and Nate, which, we focus on winning the championship, right? And yet I like, I've really enjoyed coaches that talk about like championship behaviors, behaving like champions. I think we've all at least have been a coach, or we know a coach who's won it all, and we're like, God, I'm so glad this year is over, right? And then we've had someone be there that they've gotten really close, maybe, or they just fell short, or they had that dream season. Weren't the champions of it all, right? They weren't state champions, they weren't national champions, but they can look at it and say, yeah, my team were champions in how they showed up every day, their behaviors, their process. And so I think there is a bit of, moving the identity away from maybe the outcomes and more into the behavioral type of things. And that does work for some coaches. I'm not saying it's going to work in every environment, but it does resonate with some athletes.
And I would just jump on that too, JP, that your context really matters too, like in the course of your program. Like when we started in year one, after the team before us won one game, we weren't talking about we're not trying to get to 5 wins or 10 wins. It's like, we're just trying to get better. And we had measurements for that, but it wasn't, we get to this milestone or else. And we didn't, even in year two. So we go 500 my first year. In year two, we get to a regional final, lose to go to the state tournament, but it wasn't like state tournament or bust. Our motto that year was, I'm just excited to see what was on our wristbands, because it was like, we're getting better and we're just excited to see how good we can be by at the end of the year, and that ambiguity sort of reference that, yeah, we should be better and we should keep making steps forward, but there's not a specific, targeted destination. So then when you lose a regional final in year 3, like now it is, we want to take the next step and make it, get to qualify for the state tournament. And there wasn't a way to hide that. You know what I mean? Like, so that's where for us, there was this pivot of, okay, well, we know where we want to go. Let's embrace it. And let's learn to understand how the challenge of chasing that is different, maybe, than just the approach of let's get better every day, And so again, a lot of that is where is your team at? What are they going to respond to? What's the trajectory of your program, and level and age and stage and all that stuff all goes into how we might frame what winning means to this year's particular team.
So when you see this integrated really well, what does that look like for a coach to integrate this from your perspective when you see both winning and purpose and they're navigating that internally well?
Internally, what I often see is truth telling. I see or hear an acknowledgement that expectations are real, that pressure is felt, that winning is important, and that purpose is prioritized. So when I see coaches integrate this well on an individual level, there's a lot of truth telling about where they are relative to what they're perceiving around them from maybe administration or parents or from other players. And then there's this facilitation, this translation of almost a very similar process internally with the players that are involved. So it's to your point earlier, JP, asking questions about, okay, we're coming off a championship year. Do any of you feel the pressure of expectation to repeat as national champions? And to explore whatever is true for the player. So if I had to put it into, 1 or 2 words, truth telling is something that I see as a hallmark of coaches and athletes and programs that really integrate well in this area.
That really comes down to awareness, right? Like they have to be aware of really what is going on in that internal struggle and then being upfront with it.
And I think for the person, we think about the coach in that place, right? Because as we talked about before, an administrator or the public or the fan base or the players, everybody maybe has their certain perceptions on how the season should go, quote unquote. I think JP, you hit it on the head earlier with a question of like, who do I want to be? If we win a state title, who do I want to be? If we fall short, who do I want to be? Who do we want to be? Right. And I think that's where, the balancing act here between, having an audacious goal, but not losing sight of yourself in the pursuit of that goal can be anchored in an understanding of kind of the identity that I or we want to have, right? Like I don't want to become a tyrant to win a state title. I don't want to, you know, whatever, alienate players or, win at all costs. Like we don't want to be in that place, create a terrible experience, whatever it might be. And so there is an awareness, like you said there, but I think there's also some pre-work where we're asking those questions about, when the pressure starts to mount, who do we want to be? And we're thinking about that before we're in those moments, right? And so coaches that are, asking themselves that, they're reflecting on it, they're journaling on it, they're having those conversations with their staff so that they can sort of keep tabs on, are we drifting too far into winning at all costs, and getting away from ourselves, so to speak. That awareness piece is the anchor, I think, that maybe can integrate, as you said, sort of both of those things, but it is that ability to be aware of it all at the same time.
And to your point, Nate, that awareness for me also with coaches that integrate well means they're very intentional about creating pressure before it just organically comes at a certain point or after a certain level of success. And when I see it done well, there's not just the, okay, we're going to make this a competitive drill, or we're going to, change the numbers so that the offense is at a disadvantage to create more pressure. It's not just the creation or the simulation of pressure. There's an intentional exploration for the purpose of generating awareness. Okay, as you experience this pressure, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What are you saying to yourself and others? What are you making it mean if you can or can't execute the way you normally can in this pressure situation? And how is that impacting future like situations? There's not just the creation, there's an intentional exploration for the purpose of generating awareness. And this is all done before the actual pressure hits.
Yeah, I love those questions you were starting to touch on there too, Betsy. Like, how do we start to drive that awareness? I mean, I think I look at like the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team, one of the most winningest sports teams of all time. It could be very easy to be on that team and be caught up of like, "Ah, I've gotten this jersey, I've got to prove myself, right?" There could be so many different narratives in each individual's life. They could have had a tumultuous relationship with their father or a distance relation. Like there's just so many things that play into the human psychology of what makes, us tick, what's driven us. But, if I was having a conversation with an athlete in that type of setting, you'd hope that they would be more purpose driven in their desire to win, like to represent the jersey, that to represent their family, to what a World Cup would mean to the country again. Like these are the things that you'd hope would be like really motivating and driving them. And yet those questions like you touched on, I would say are like, if you don't win, what's at risk? What's at risk in all this? What's at stake for you if you don't win? What would be the worst thing about not winning the World Cup this year? And those types of questions start to really bring forth for us and for our athletes. So to ask ourselves, to ask our coaches, to ask us as a team and get people in the room, if we're feeling the pressure, hey, what would be the worst thing about us not winning this? And to get people to articulate that would really start to uncover where that pressure is coming from. Because I think there's an element of like the pressure, it can be good. The pressure can be when it's sometimes maybe connected to a purpose. Like it does matter. It does matter to this country. It does matter to our state. It matters to our community. Whatever you are, if you're in sport, winning does have an impact on that community. And it can mean something to, I was at a sporting event with my son here in Ireland just last week, and there's 80,000 people, and we're down 6 points at the half, and then we end up winning it. I mean, just what it meant to us, that's a day we'll remember forever. Can those players have a connection to that, what it's doing for other people? Or is it all about just going out there and proving themselves, right? And I think that's the awareness of that is huge.
You mentioned that question, you're like, what's at risk, or what's the worst thing that can happen? And I remember feeling incredibly heartbroken when it was a 13-year-old boy who said, well, if I don't do this, then my dad won't love me as much. And that's very different than like, if we don't win, I don't get a medal, or like that kind of thing. So just understanding that, to your point, JP, having people name it. I'm thinking about the woman who recently tried to break the 4-minute mile, and how emotional it was, like the whole day leading up to it. And we told our daughters about it, and we had it up on the TV, and I was reading the articles, and we watched some of the mini documentaries and the backstory. And I was so excited for her. And I was also thinking, oh my gosh, like, what if she doesn't do it? And then watching the race live, and noticing, becoming aware of my own emotions as halfway through the 800, she's right at 2 minutes. And I'm like, oh no. And they're like, well, she says she's got a great kick, so maybe, it's going to happen. And reflecting now, about a few days after she didn't make it, I'm almost glad that she didn't. Not because I don't want her to be successful, but when we talk about winning, when we talk about resilience, when we talk about purpose, like, if the purpose of pursuing greatness is growth, development, innovation, aspiration, inspiration, motivation, like, so much of that was achieved. And what a fantastic opportunity, to your point, Nate, that does not exist if she had made it. If she had made it, there would be a lot of celebration. But because she didn't make it, there's a lot more that for me has like depth and richness and purpose, because she didn't win in this certain context. And I'll say didn't yet win. I know she's committed to trying again, and to continuing to help evolve the sport. But that just, for me personally, was like a very, I don't know, it encapsulates for me this conversation of, we talk about purpose, we talk about winning, and like, what else is there? What isn't part of the conversation when we think about those two things that would benefit us to start to consider, or to bring with intention into our conversations with our teams?
Betsy, what you're talking about there, I think, is kind of what we tried to echo with our team at the end of last year after we did win a state title. It wasn't that we won it necessarily as much as we had the courage to say we're going to try to do a hard thing. And we made that public, and everybody knew what the goal was, and we were going to chase it even if we didn't accomplish the thing. And I think that, the community and our fans and our parents and, even players in the years that we haven't made it, or we've ended in disappointment, but we were trying to accomplish a big thing. There's a deep satisfaction that maybe doesn't show up in the immediacy, in the moments after that race. But there's a pride there that said, I gave everything I had to try to do this thing that we said was important to us. And there's such a level of respect, I think, for that, and I think, again, with our kids, like, it's really hard to be public about a goal like that. It's audacious. It's I don't want to say it's like boastful or arrogant, but it's like, this matters to us and we're going to go for it. And I think that's where the richness of saying, yeah, we're going to chase a hard thing, win or lose. We're going to develop resiliency. We're going to learn lessons along the way. But isn't that what life is, right? And isn't that really what we're trying to offer kids? And so when we think about this conversation, it's not a dichotomy. It's not one or the other. The real challenge here is, how do we allow the pursuit of winning to serve our purpose? And how does our purpose, as we create a great experience and we create great relationships and we build leaders, help us to chase goals and to challenge ourselves even further? I think that's the place that we all want to land. And it's just a matter of asking the hard questions, of being reflective, of having some awareness and saying, yeah, we're going to have the courage to set a goal and to be who we want to be along the way.
So folks, that's it for today's episode. If you found it valuable, it's one you might really value checking out the coaching notes, not just for a summary of the points we made, but in our notes, the episodes, we put together an action plan and some action items for you to consider. Now, how do you get the notes? That's easy. You just need to subscribe to the weekly Culture Toolbox. You can do that at tocculture.com. Thanks again for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review and share this episode if you found it valuable.